Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Goldin, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council Geoeconomic Center. Welcome back to World Bank IMF Week. We're live inside the studio at IMF HQ1, and I am very delighted to be joined right now by EBRD President Odile Renaud-Basso. She was just re-elected to her second term in May of this year and is the first woman to head up a multilateral development bank. She was previously Director General at the French Treasury, and in that role also served as Deputy to the G7, to the G20, and was the Governor to the World Bank, EBRD, and African Development Bank. So really, we could not have a better person to talk to this week. I'm honored for you to join me, Madam President. Thank you very much. Let me start by asking, we're on day 4 of the big week. How is it going? What have been your priorities?
So, I mean, it's going well. It's always a very important moment to meet a lot of people, and I think for us, it's meeting both, colleague IFI, or sister IFIs, other MDBs, IMF, and to exchange notes about the assessment of the situation, how we can improve our work together, but also talking to a lot of countries and clients. So you have, it's a huge opportunity to meet so many people in a short period of time that it's really worthwhile.
On that note, one of the things we're hearing, obviously lots of talk this week about the global, the regional, and the different situations in terms of the economy. The World Economic Outlook, came out on Tuesday with a sort of relatively positive outlook to some degree in the inflation situation, but a number of downsides and risks. Western Europe, not necessarily doing so well, but how are you feeling about, what are you seeing in your regions of operation, and particularly, obviously, the Middle East, North Africa, other parts of Europe seeing some conflict challenges, climate change. How are you thinking about that? What are you seeing, and how is it affecting your operations?
So overall, we see resilience, as it was the theme of the IMF, WEO, and so forth. So the resilience of the economy, the fact that we are on positive growth territories. We revise slightly downwards our forecast, but still we see better growth for next year. Our forecast is really an increase of growth for next year, and a strong resilience. Inflation is going down everywhere, even if it's a bit more sticky in some countries than others. I'm thinking about Turkey, for example, but still there on a clearly downward trend. And adjustment. After COVID, after the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, and so forth. The situation is stabilizing in a way, and inflation has been back under control, and so forth. There are a lot of, nuance, and we also see the impact. For example, you were mentioning climate change. We see the impact of climate change. We see in a number of countries drought. Thinking about Morocco, Egypt, in other countries floods, and so we really start to measure in physical, in the reality, what climate change can mean for some countries, and the challenge, a very concrete challenge about water supply, and so forth. So overall, quite a strong resilience. The impact of the war in Ukraine, of course, is very strong on Ukraine, but the country there also, after a big shock in 2022, remains on a positive growth territory and shows some the economy is showing resilience. There also, and the other war, which is on the Middle East, we see the impact on Jordan, Lebanon, and so forth. We are worried about. It will have a big toll on population, but also on the economic development.
One of the things I think that's somewhat unique about the regional development banks broadly, and obviously, of course, for the EBRD, is your ability to be more agile and to be nimble to change with some of these shocks, and do your work differently. We had U.S. Undersecretary of the Treasury, Jay Shamba, at the Council to give his preview the other week, and he noted in his speech the very important role that the regional development banks play in the broader international financial system. How do you see your sort of differentiators? What is sort of unique about what you do in the broader system?
In a way, yes, we are more specialized because we are more focused on a limited number of countries, and we are, I would say, probably closer to the countries in which we work. So with very important footprint for EBRD. Very often in the countries, we work in 38 countries, soon a bit more, but we are very important investors in the country where we are. Then we have, so that's one important, the fact that we are smaller allows us to be probably a bit more agile and to react quickly to events and to adjust to the needs of the countries, the circumstances and so forth. I think the war in Ukraine tested our agility, to come with quick solution, and ways to continue to support the countries in the war was for us quite challenging, but in few months we really set up an answer that fits the purpose. And so that's I would say the big feature. We also, for example, as EBRD has a very specific mandate, which is and quite specific model, because our mandate is really the transition towards market economy. We've been created, for the post-Soviet world, help these countries, post-Soviet countries, to move towards market economy, democracy, and so forth. So this remains part of our DNA. We focus a lot on private sector, so 75% of our financing is in the private sector. The value added, I think, is also the fact that we can do both. So we are mostly private sector, but we can still support public sector projects that will facilitate the development of the private sector. And let me just take one example. Yeah. We do a lot of renewable investment with private sector development, but to have renewable, you need to have grid, and grid is very often state-owned enterprise or public sector. So we can invest in the grid, try to reform also the state-owned enterprise to be more efficient and effective and earn money and not be loss-making and so forth. And then, bringing together this strategy, bring public and private sector all together.
It really is amazing. And we are seeing, obviously, the World Bank is very much focused on private capital mobilization, thinking about how it can leverage its dollars. And you've been able to do that incredibly successfully. Any particular secret sauce that you think is, how you've been able to bring in so much private capital, as well as you said, hybrid, and bring it together with the public funding that you provide?
Our philosophy is really to be additional, so not to crowd out the private sector capital. Yeah. For example, when we participate to a bond issuance, and we play the role of anchor investor in the bond issuance in a country where the investors' appetite is not so big, we are very careful not to, to define a maximum level of investment, 30% of the issuance, but if there is demand, and if, we decrease our share, so we can go down to 20% or lower, because we don't want to crowd out the private sector, because our key objective is really to bring the private sector in these countries. Yeah. So that's one important element. The other is to always try to develop new instruments. The private sector bank, for example, appetite for emerging market has been decreasing in the context of new Basel regulation, the cost of capital for them, and so forth. So we develop, for example, alternative ways through mobilizing insurance company who were looking for rewards and with unfunded risk guarantees. It's a way for us to share the risk, to bring private insurers in our market. And we are exploring now securitization, and which is a way to sell part of our portfolio and to attract investors in buying emerging markets. So there is a lot of work that can be done. It's still challenging because the appetite of private investors for our countries is limited or depend on the countries, but also they are looking for large tickets. Asset managers have a lot of money, but need to have large tickets. We do sometimes small projects. So there is a lot of work that continues to be done, and we really want to continue to increase our mobilization level.
And sometimes it can be harder to do the small projects than it is to do the large projects, in terms of just the level of administration can still be the same. Picking up on that, we know MDB reform is obviously an ongoing topic, and especially this year, given the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods institutions, lots of debate and discussion around how they can be better fit for purpose in the next 80 years and beyond. And the World Bank has been on this evolution agenda journey. I'm curious how those reforms and the reform in the sort of Bretton Woods institutions has affected your own sort of governance journey, and how you're working and your ability to work more or less with, whether it's the bank, the fund, or even any of the other IFIs.
So, we have I think regional development bank has been part of the journey of transformation of the Bretton Woods system, and it has impact on us. For example, we worked very actively on the CAF report, Capital Adequacy Framework report, which was launched by the G20 and really review the different banks, World Bank and the Regional Development Bank, capital adequacy rules and framework, and this helped. I think this was very useful in ensuring comparison and looking at the best practices and joining forces in some discussion with credit rating agencies and so forth. So we were part of this exercise and really useful for us. We are one dimension of the MDB reform is also the agenda of cooperation. How MDBs, regional development banks, and World Bank can work together better. Because I think we need to be client focused, think at what the country, working with us represent for a country's operation, and the cost of doing business with us is not, it's far from zero. So we are really working together on this agenda. We work a lot, for example, very closely with IFC, with EIB, which are, for us, the closest, probably the most similar, but also Asian Development Bank in Central Asia, African Development Bank in Africa. One key idea we promote is the idea to work on country platform, in particular on the climate area, because the climate challenges are very complex. They need planning. They need to have a broad picture. So we really believe it's a good area for developing country platform. We've been very active in the Egypt country platform, which is on energy, water, and food, and particularly on the energy sector. And we are trying to develop this kind of model where, you have the country being in the driving seat, defining its priorities, and it helps organizing the work of different MDBs, bringing concessional funding to really work on the same priorities.
It's encouraging to hear that you're making such progress on the coordination front. It's not necessarily something this sector has been as successful at, so that's great to hear. You mentioned the highly concessional funding. I wanted to pick up on that quickly. IDA 21 replenishment campaign is obviously very much also in full swing and is a big topic of conversation. Along those lines, one of the things I've been hearing is in some countries, in some of the donor countries, there is, I don't want to say a tension, but a balancing between their ODA or their bilateral development assistance and their allocations to and through the multilaterals. I'm curious, how that plays out among some of your members that are donor countries, and how you're sort of managing that or sort of encouraging, the multilateral side.
No, that's true. That I think there is a big. From my French experience, I can tell you that there is a real debate sometimes with. At the Parliament in particular, whether it's more relevant for a country to support a multilateral approach and put a lot of money in IDA, or to do bilateral, where you have more visibility and you can, plant the flag and say this is what we bring. So I think that you need to balance this constraint, and in an environment where public money is scarce, it's probably, makes sense to put money where it's most efficient, and where for €1 you put or $1 you put, you have the best impact. So I think that should be the driving component. But of course, you need to balance this objective. What we see from our perspective is we rely on donor funding, and we always need also to balance because some countries are ready to provide us with some support, but with very strict conditions, targeted to this country or this kind of activity and so forth, because this is what they consider as priority. But then it's very heavy to manage, and it creates a lot of complexity in the system. So there are always this trade-off between big and simple and smaller and more adjusted to the different countries' priority, but this has a cost.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. I spent a little bit of time at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and then sort of working more in the multilateral space and seeing some of that balance. And it sounds like you have that experience on both sides, and it's tricky, right? We'll start to see. And I know you have a very busy day still ahead of you, and so I've been grateful for your time, but I couldn't let you go without asking one more question. We had ECB President Lagarde with us yesterday at the Council, and she was asked a question about the paucity, if you will, of women in economic financial leadership. I believe it's about just 12% of finance ministers, central bank governors are currently women. Obviously, given your experience, your leadership, I'm curious to hear your take on the situation, what some of the barriers have been, and then also how this translates into your work more broadly in promoting inclusive growth. I know it's obviously a priority for the work that you do.
So no, I think that the situation as you described is the reality, and there is a lot of way to go to improve and to rebalance the situation. I must say that as a top executive of a bank, I realize that now it's not only because I have an executive committee and so forth, and it's not only because you want to look good and to have a balanced executive committee and so forth. It's also when you have a group like that, taking decision together or discussing the priorities, that having a balanced perspective with men and women makes a big difference. So in the terms of the quality of the discussion, the different perspective and so forth, it's very important. So it's not, this should not be seen by company as a sort of mandatory exercise to respect ESG and so forth, but it's really, I think, in terms of quality of the outcome, a very important component. So it's a big. There is a long way to go, I think, because it's a question of. And you need to bring women up in the hierarchy and so forth. I see. From the bank perspective, we have targets in terms of how many women, and we have, and at the sort of from direct to corporate leadership, we have 40% of women. So which is not a bad situation, but we are still not at the parity. And sometimes you have choices, and it's so. But this we keep on pushing and really taking that as an important dimension. We work in countries where the mindset of it, there is also a lot of work to do. I was looking just as a sort of survey we've done, showing that in our countries of operation, 88% of the people consider that women are as competent as men, but 66% consider that the best organization was for men to work outside and earn money, and for women to stay at home and take care of the children. So this is quite amazing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So it was. I was shocked by the figures, and so it shows that there is, a lot of work to do, and this is something we try to do. With the countries in which we work, both at the policy level to promote in the government policies and this agenda, but also with clients. So we work with private sector, businesses, and so forth, and always try to bring with our project some measures or commitment or policy advice for them to have. To have a better balanced workforce, train women, have a better role of women in the executive direction of the companies and so forth. So it's something we push at the macro and micro level.
It's really, we're lucky to have you in this leadership role as a female economist, and truly inspiring. So thank you for the work you do. And I know you have, like I said, a busy day and a busy week ahead. So thank you, Madam President, for taking some time to join us this afternoon. And thank you. We will be back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. So join us and continue to follow all of our live analysis. And you can rewatch all of our events that have happened this week in the studio at atlanticcouncil.org. Thank you for tuning in.